Let's get it on then, shall we? Mwah. Welcome to Sex on the Peach, your weekly hump day dose of everyone's favourite untalked about topic, sex. Let's get honest, let's get open, let's get comfortable, and let's get into this week's show. Good morning, everyone. Happy hump day, happy Wednesday, and welcome to another episode of Sex on the Peach. I'm your host, Peach, and today we're going to tap into our very first conversation about kink, fetish, and BDSM. As with everything in the sexual space, these are vast topics, and there's simply no way to cover everything all in one go. Unless you're looking for 12-hour-long podcast episodes, which I highly, highly doubt. So, we can consider this an almost kink for beginners episode. Maybe you're looking to start spicing up the sex in your relationship. Maybe you're trying to find the confidence to be open about a kink or fetish you may have. Maybe you just want to get a bit more of an understanding about what the kink, fetish, or BDSM space even means. Whatever it is, I'm going to try my best to show you the ropes today. I'm happy to be open with my experiences within the space. Hopefully, it might make someone feel more comfortable with the knowledge it's perfectly okay to have kinks and fetishes and fantasies. It's natural. The vast majority of people do have these urges. I've got you. We don't judge here. And you deserve to have the sexual exploration into these things that you desire. As always, I'll be answering some of your questions. So, let's strap in. As for today, Sex on the Peach becomes Sex on the Leash. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is a kink? A kink is anything that lives outside what is considered standard, conventional, or as some people might say, vanilla sex. Some might even define it as being outside what society deems as acceptable. But honestly, fuck that. It's acceptable. This could mean something like using handcuffs or restraints or role play. And what a person considers kinky is completely subjective. Some may find one person's kink just part of what they consider to be a relatively standard sexual experience. But whatever is kinky for you is completely valid. Kink is something included in a sexual practice to enhance pleasure. This is different to a fetish, which is something that defines a person's sexual practice and is something that must be present for the person to enjoy a sexual experience or to achieve arousal. Kink is an umbrella term, and there is often a bit of overlap between the two topics. But the best way to look at it is that a kink is something someone likes to do, and a fetish is something someone has to do if they want to achieve sexual pleasure. Kinks are more based in an explorative space, and fetishes are a sexual necessity. Kink also includes all aspects of what we call BDSM, which stands for bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, sadism, and masochism. This side of sex is something there is literally no education about, and something we all have to discover for ourselves whilst feeling alone and shameful in doing so. For most people I know, their introduction into this world was discovered with the books and movies 50 Shades of Grey. And listen, I saw people get hot and heavy over these books. I looked around and thought, yeah, see, you're all kinkier than you think. However, this is something I feel we really need to take a moment for, because these books and these movies made sexual fantasy a little more mainstream, a little more acceptable to talk about for a hot second, and made BDSM almost trendy. But it was not an accurate or healthy representation of what BDSM in a relationship should look like, and should not be looked at as the standard for kinky sex, in the same way that the majority of pornography is not an accurate representation of what real sex looks like. And so, 50 Shades are not resources that people should look to when they are considering exploring kink with their partner. Whilst BDSM is often the practice of combining sex and pain, it is done in a healthy and ethical way, and from a place of knowledge and communication. But this story does not incorporate these things. What we see is a woman and vulva owner agreeing to sex that she isn't even really comfortable with, which is never what the kink space should be. It also sticks to very traditional ideals of femininity and masculinity and plays into the hands of a very targeted, white, cisgender, heteronormative audience, just furthering society's bullshit of what the ideal couple is. But in reality, it is not indicative of what a BDSM relationship looks like at all. And what is most troubling about these books and movies is the fact the two characters have terrible communication, which is the fundamental key to a successful sex life that includes kink play and BDSM. For most people, when they think of the terms kink or S&M, they immediately think of whips or being tied up or leather. And yes, for some people that absolutely is the case. But the truth is, the kink space is actually an endless world of sexual and play possibilities. And there's no right or wrong or weird to what your personal kink might be. It can honestly feel like you're entering a whole new world of sex, especially when it comes to language. And we will continue to work our way through some of those terms as we talk through the episode. But I promise you, it's a lot more simple than it all sounds, because it's just a form of play. And whilst it can involve and include the more stereotypical things, it's really a space to let your imagination fly. But delving into kink with a partner or partners, whilst it can add a bit of novelty to what might be a more standard sexual practice, it can also build greater communication, greater trust, and greater intimacy. The kink space is one of the most communicative and trusting of the sexual spaces, because it has to be, especially if you're playing with anything that involves pain. For example, I'm personally someone who enjoys being choked during sex sometimes, which is quite a common pain play, but obviously one that needs to be dealt with through trust and communication, because you're literally placing your safety in someone's hands for the sake of sexual pleasure. I also enjoy being spanked, which again is fairly common and is of course a little less dangerous, but still requires a level of trust that if something gets too much or is too painful, you're able to say that to your partner and have it be respected. As always, the most important thing when it comes to kink, fetish, BDSM is consent. Everything you enter into together has to be consensual. When you're dealing with pain play, consent is literally the difference between kink and abuse. So I cannot emphasize this enough. I've been fairly open in previous episodes about the fact that I have a previous partner that did not honour boundaries that were put in place, and it severely affected my ability to engage in kink activity for a long time, and still does to a degree. And that goes from something as simple as continuing to squeeze my neck and choke me after I'd signalled I wanted it to stop, which is actually really scary, or hitting me way harder during sex than I would have ever okayed. And the entire point of the pleasure-pain line is the pleasure. So if you're essentially using it as an excuse to just beat your partner up, that's abuse. If you have a partner who is pushing or not listening to your boundaries in this way, it's not okay. Listen to your gut and get out as quickly as you can, because you do not deserve that. And that's not why the kink space exists. It actually isn't a fine line. You discuss your boundaries, you put the consent in place, and you respect them. But whilst we're on the subject of pain play, I know that a lot of people feel like they are weird for enjoying any level of pain during sex, because surely the two should be incompatible, right? But you're absolutely not weird. Even scientifically, this makes complete sense, because pain and pleasure can activate the same mechanisms in the brain which are responsible for our reward systems, which include sex. This is, of course, completely different from sex just being painful. If you aren't getting a level of sexual gratification from any painful sensations during sex, then sex shouldn't be painful for people engaging in it. So, let's talk through some common kinks. We've already mentioned BDSM and what this means, but it's essentially rooted in power play and power exchange. It's about one partner consensually exerting dominance over the other partner or partners. I personally love to be dominated in the bedroom, and there's quite often a lot of bullshit judgment here. To be a strong, independent, opinionated, feminist woman or vulva owner and say you like to be dominated during sex seems to really piss people off or have them throwing out all sorts of opinions. But here's the thing. You are in control of the situation here. You are in control of your desires, in control of your boundaries. So fuck this, honestly. It doesn't make you any less of a boss bitch just because you like someone to take charge during sex every now and again. People also always assume that the dominant one in this position is the one in control. But my loves, I beg to differ. On the contrary, in a healthy BDSM sexual space, the sub has the control. They will have expressed their kinks, their boundaries, their desires, and the dominant one will be adhering to these and serving them, all in the name of satisfaction. S&M is also under this umbrella, and this goes back to the pleasure pain line, and it stands for sadism and masochism. So if you're a sadist, you're getting pleasure from inflicting the pain on your partner. And if you're on the masochism side of things, you derive pleasure from receiving it. People might think that sadist sounds like a horrendous thing to be called, but this can really be as simple as becoming more turned on from spanking your partner during doggy style, from biting them, from scratching them. It doesn't make you the monster that the word sadist seems to bring up in people's heads. It is okay to enjoy these things in the sexual space. Ropes and bondage are probably the most common kink out there and are a good one to play with if you enjoy feeling restricted or vice versa. I'm a huge fan of this, but listen, it is a kink that requires a safe word so that if you need to end the situation quickly, you can. And also make sure that you can speedily and safely remove the ropes or bondage if necessary. If anyone doesn't know what a safe word is, it's a pre-decided word or statement that a partner or partners can use during a sexual experience if they require it to stop. Sometimes people play with consensual non-consent, so the words no or stop are not going to cut it because they could be mistaken as a part of the play. Red is the most commonly used safe word, but this will be something for yourself and your partner or partners to decide between you. Role play is a huge part of the kink space, and if this is something you think you might be into, you can almost develop a whole different sexual persona by stepping outside yourself into these other characters. And it's a great way to play out any fantasies you may have. Although, listen, I've spoken to my friends many times about this because they love a spa, and so do I. But I used to have a fantasy about getting a massage and having sex with my masseuse. And that is something that actually ended up happening. But it does mean I've always been a little bit incapable of seeing massage outside of being something overtly sexual. So that's something I have to play out with partners because I actually cannot get normal massages now. Things as simple as dirty talk are considered kink. For some people, this might be considered vanilla and just a part of their usual sexual practice, but actually, it's kinky, babes. You'll know if this is a kink for you or not if using explicit language during sex heightens your excitement and helps you reach orgasm quicker. I've spoken about it on a previous episode, but golden showers or water sports, extremely common and definitely sits more commonly in the dom subspace. Another super common kink is nipple play. A lot of people get loads of pleasure from their nipples and therefore like a lot of time to be spent licking and biting them. I mean, listen, I got mine pierced because I read that you can orgasm purely from your nipples if you do. I am yet for that to happen, but I'll come back to you if it does. Exhibitionism is another hugely explored kink space and is essentially enjoying being watched during sex. I don't know if I would call myself an exhibitionist when it comes to sex, but I specifically have a kink about giving partners blowjobs in cars whilst they're driving. Should I even be admitting that? Not sure. Obviously, we keep it safe. That's just a more specific one to me. In fact, I'm kind of all about sex in a car. It didn't used to be possible for me in my own car because for the longest time I owned a Mini and there's literally no space. But realistically, if you do enjoy the exhibitionist side of things, I would recommend that rather than putting yourself in a position to get arrested for indecent exposure, you can explore this kink in settings like a sex club or a play event. I get asked for recommendations of these a lot, and at present, the ones I would recommend are Le Boudoir, Seven Sins, and Dominium Vita would be at the top of the list. These are all sex parties and play events that you can go to either alone or with a partner and explore the kinkier sides of yourselves. The flip side of exhibitionism is voyeurism, which is where you're turned on watching other people have sex. This can be explored with your own partner or partners by using a mirror to see yourselves whilst having sex, or in a consensual situation at a sex event or club. More specifically, cuckolding, which is being turned on by your own partner having sex with someone else. So you get it. The kink space is huge, and this is barely scratching the surface. The more we talk about kink, the deeper into all of these things we'll get. But hopefully, for today, I've given you enough to consider, or at least maybe opened your mind to think if there is something you might like within any of the facets of the space. Now, how to open up these conversations with a partner. For a start, as I mention in every episode, I want people to be having regular sexual check-ins and conversations anyway. And if you are, introducing a conversation about kinks or fantasies is going to feel a hell of a lot easier. As always, plan for a good time to have this conversation and let your partner know you want to talk about something that's important to you. It's never a good idea to broach a conversation like this during an intimate moment because people are vulnerable. So try to have it at a neutral time for everyone involved. Let your partner know if this makes you feel vulnerable and acknowledge that it might feel like a scary thing to approach and talk about. You can also always approach it by asking them if they have any fantasies or anything they've been thinking they might like to try in your sexual relationship. For a start, don't feel ashamed. We all have internalized sex shame because of what we've been taught, but your kink is normal and healthy, as are all consensual sexual practices, I promise. Explain the things that you would like to try, always leaving space for them to also communicate their feelings on it so that the conversation feels collaborative rather than a one-sided situation. If you do feel nervous about how your partner might respond, you could always test the water by saying you've read about this kink or heard about it or have a friend who is into it, and see how they react. And it will give you a sense of how into it or not they might be, and a better idea of how to proceed with the conversation. As always, with sexual discussions, have it from a positive place of wanting to bring even more pleasure to your sexual relationship, as opposed to one that suggests you're unsatisfied with the sex you're currently having. Feel confident in yourself and what you're trying to express, and also have it come with the offer to reciprocate, so that again, it feels like a collaboration for the two of you. It might be something you need to ease into as a couple. And that's okay. Take it slow. Work through it together. You may want to watch some ethical porn together that shows the kink you're interested in. There's lots of ways to work into it. And you always have time. There's no rush. At the end of the day, if you don't discuss these things with your partner, you're potentially missing out on a whole world of sexual satisfaction. And it's okay to prioritize your sexual needs, because no one else is going to do it for you. Okay, I'm going to start moving in to this week's questions. Number 1, how important are kinks to people? Like, if I tell my partner I'm not interested in exploring theirs, will they be subconsciously wanting to find someone who will? Okay, well, how important a kink is to someone will be completely different from person to person. And it will be completely up to your partner to be honest with you about where they sit within that. They may purely fantasize about a particular kink, but in reality are happy to go without it if their partner is truly not into it. However, for some people, these specific kinks or fantasies or desires can feel like a huge part of their sexual identity and something they require sexually in order to feel fully satisfied. If this is the case, expecting them to completely ignore that or set it aside is probably unrealistic and could create a feeling of resentment between the two of you. I know it probably isn't what you want to hear, but this is an honest space. It is a possibility that someone may then think about another person fulfilling that for them. Whether that's something they would ever actually act on or not is an entirely different matter. Again, that will depend on the level of importance this carries for them, which you will only find out through honest and potentially uncomfortable conversations with each other. This will require trust and really, really good communication. Sex is a very vulnerable subject, and I don't know how the conversation originally came up or if it even has yet, but to talk about something as personal as kinks and fetishes takes courage. And there will be an element of worry that a partner may reject you or judge you for those thoughts and desires. So even if you don't relate to their kink at all, even if it gives you a little discomfort, it's imperative that the conversation remains respectful, calm, and non-judgmental. Try, at the very least, honour their courage to have brought this up with you. There's a huge difference between telling someone you respect their desires but aren't really into it, and making them feel embarrassed or dismissed. It may be something you feel like you don't have an answer to in that exact moment, and it's perfectly okay to respectfully ask for a little time to think about it and maybe process how it's made you feel. Sometimes a partner may have a kink that involves a role play that may be triggering to another partner, and that can be a really difficult thing to navigate. So taking time and having kind and sensitive discussion is really important. Sometimes it can be a fantasy that involves light bondage or a specific type of material like silk or latex. And even though that might not be your thing, it might be something you are able to find a way to engage in. But if you really feel it's something that you absolutely cannot be a part of, it's important that you do not shame your partner or use negative language towards their kink or fantasy, and instead keep the focus on yourself in the conversation rather than point any fingers or place blame. Think about whether there are ways you can explore it through compromise. Sometimes people may fantasize about having a threesome, and you may be able to work through something like this by watching some ethical porn together that involves these scenarios, or even just engaging in some dirty talk about them. I know it's also still a very radical thought for a lot of people, given the societal ideals we all grew up in, but more and more people these days are considering opening their relationships for reasons like this, so that people are able to get specific needs met or fulfilled, which is obviously something that comes with a lot of trust, communication, and boundaries in place. But again, this will depend on the level of gravitas this all holds for your partner. I've been fairly open about the fact anal sex isn't for me, and if that's something a partner of mine is into, I'm more than happy for them to explore that elsewhere, as long as it's practiced safely. What I would say, for any relationship where two people care about each other and care about each other's sexual pleasure, which you should because it's an important and integral part of a relationship, try your best not to give a point-blank no and show that you have absolutely no intention of even considering something that may be enjoyable to them, because that simply isn't particularly supportive behaviour as a partner. These conversations need and deserve to be treated with love and respect. Relationships are based on compatibility, and sexual compatibility is a part of that. And you both also have to take responsibility for your own sexual needs and desires. So if these kinks are central to your partner's sexual identity and they feel like a necessity for pleasure for them, and there is no compromise to be had, it may be that eventually the relationship won't be sustainable in the long term. No matter how much two people care about one another, a relationship where both people aren't able to get their needs met may have to be let go of. And you may be better suited to people with more similar sexual interests. However, I am really hoping that through honest discussion, you're able to find a way through this that works best for the both of you. Less of a question, but an FYI. You can't just use any candle for wax games. Some waxes will burn you, and not in a fun way. Hashtag blistered tits. Yes to this. Absolutely yes to this. Wax play is very common in the kink space, but as with most kink activities, it's not something you should just go ploughing into without some research and preparation. Wax play is exactly what it sounds like. It's the act of pouring hot wax on a partner or partners. Obviously, if you like to play with the pleasure-pain line in this way, it can feel amazing. But this is hugely dependent on the type of candle you use as to determine that level of pain. If you are a beginner, you can look into massage candles that burn at a very, very low temperature, and therefore their pain level is extremely minimal, if at all. But it's a good way to introduce the practice into your sexual experience. You can buy specific wax play candles that will burn a little hotter than this, as they are specifically designed for this level of wax play, and therefore the heat is part of it. You can also look into soy candles, which specifically cool extremely quickly once they make contact with the skin. Once you're into paraffin or beeswax candles, we're talking about something completely different. Now, that level of pain or heat may be what you're into, and of course, that's absolutely fine. But I would suggest building up to that in order to figure that out. And please do stay safe within it. Just think of it like getting into a shower and slowly turning the heat up rather than stepping into water that is already boiling hot. You can always try a teeny bit on your hand to see how that feels before dropping it onto your partner. And the first time you do try it on a partner, make sure to start from a height and not extremely close to their skin. It's something to experiment slowly with. Remember, you are literally playing with fire, so be careful and keep it away from the face at all times. If anything goes wrong, treat it like you would any other kind of burn. Wax play used to be something I was very much into when I was exploring the pleasure-pain line. But it is now one of the things that are included when I speak about finding my way back into certain kinks post-trauma. As mentioned earlier, that same partner who abused the line of BDSM on more than one occasion thought it was perfectly okay to literally throw full candles of wax on me during a sexual experience, which was hugely painful in a completely unpleasurable way. And beyond that, has left me with multiple physical scars from doing so. So, please be respectful, please be consensual, and always set strong boundaries when it comes to playing in this way. Next question. I'm concerned my kink may be too problematic, so I'm too nervous to tell any of my partners or friends about it. Any suggestions? One of the biggest misconceptions about the kink and BDSM space is that it's abuse or of an abusive nature. And therefore, a lot of us are made to believe that our kinks are problematic or weird or freakish. But really, unless you're breaking a law, and as long as everything you're doing is consensual, or if you haven't explored it yet, that everything you will be doing will be from a consensual space, technically, your kink isn't problematic. More often than not, the reason kink is viewed so negatively is because there's a complete lack of understanding about it. We're taught that it's something to be ashamed of because it doesn't meet society's standards of what is considered right or okay, which is reinforced to us constantly in the media. People who healthily and consensually like to indulge in dominant sexual behaviour are not dangerous or abusive, and submissives are not lifeless doormats. So we can't really learn about or feel safe about the kink space when we're surrounded by inaccurate portrayals of it in the media through, again, movies like 50 Shades or Secretary. The difference between a kink being problematic or not is intent. And if the intent is to explore that kink consensually and communicatively with a partner, then it's not problematic, whether society has made you believe that or not. And any act between two or more consenting adults where sexual gratification is derived shouldn't be looked down on. People's past traumas may make certain kinks off limits, but that's something you can only find out through open and honest discussion with your partner or partners. So honestly, my only suggestion is that you find the time to have this conversation with your partner. I know that can feel daunting or nerve-wracking, but hopefully the tips from earlier in the episode about opening these conversations with a partner will help. This is a space that requires an open mind because we're so ingrained to believe otherwise. So approach it with care, but I really hope this is something you're able to work through together as a team with a lot of trust and understanding in place. Next up, worried that doing even slightly kinky things with my girlfriend, choking, spanking, dominating her, will mean that I won't be able to come from or enjoy more vanilla, loving sex. Okay, so I guess the first question you want to ask yourself is, do you enjoy vanilla sex now? If so, there's little reason you can't enjoy it after having more kinky sex. If you aren't really enjoying the more conventional sex in the first place, then it's possible that you will enjoy it even less so once you've explored some kinkier sex. In which case, I would recommend some communication with your partner and some work on your sex life from those more basic standpoints and making that sexual connection really strong so that the kink exploration doesn't take over and become the sole reason you derive pleasure through sex. But if you are beginning to explore more from the place that you already love the more conventional sex that you're already having, you can look at it as being able to enjoy the best of both worlds. You can enjoy vanilla sex and BDSM sex without creating a competition or conflict out of it. In the same way that some days you want sushi and some days you want pasta. Some days you might want upbeat pop music, some days you might want slow jams. You don't stop enjoying pasta or slow jams just because sometimes you have sushi or upbeat pop. I know, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but you get my drift. You can look at it more as having it all rather than having one or the other. And also, if you and your partner are in a place where you're ready to start exploring the things you've mentioned in your question, that's only a good thing, that you're actively looking to expand your sex life and potentially unlock more pleasure for the both of you. Also, all you can do as a partnership is try. So if you are worried, just take it slow. Try one thing at a time, and if you do feel it's affecting you in the way you're worried about, then be honest with your partner and see how you can find a way through that. I think there's a place for a Friday night kink fest and a Sunday morning romantic spoon. And you might find that you get more out of both for different reasons once you've got more to play with in your sexual world as a partnership. What you don't want to do is hold yourself back from trying things together out of a fear that might not even come to pass, because you may only be denying yourselves a whole world of pleasure as a couple. Who knows? You may both enjoy the journey into kink or BDSM so much that she doesn't feel the urge for the more vanilla sex side of things. Honestly, all you can both do is communicate all of these things with each other. Let her know that this is a concern in a kind and respectful way. Explore together, continue to communicate. Explore some more, communicate some more. This is honestly the way you carve out a healthy sexual relationship, by exploring and communicating. And if you do find that it changes things, if you're in a place where you're already open with each other in your channels of communication, then it will be highly likely something you're able to work through with, you guessed it, more exploration and more communication. I hope that it works out for both of you and just creates a space for more pleasure and more sexual connection. Next up, is it problematic to want to explore roleplay that involves non-consensual situations, like a stranger in the night or simulating being tied up and forced to come? I just don't know if that's okay or if it's something I should explore. Okay, so listen. Yes, this is an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people. And it's easy to understand why. We're talking about consensual non-consent, but this is often referred to as a rape fantasy. And people then equate a rape fantasy with actual rape. But here we go. Rape fantasies are actually one of the most common fantasies. And I know people aren't going to like hearing this, and I get why. They are one of the most common fantasies for women and vulva owners. Up to 62% of women and vulva owners will have a fantasy about something like this at least once throughout their lives. These are the uncomfortable corners of the sexual space that people are not speaking about. And this is why people feel completely alone and wrong and weird within themselves, and surely no one else is having these thoughts, and surely I must be a huge problem. But these are the facts. However, there are clear lines between a rape fantasy and actual rape. Part of the issue lies heavily within the title itself. Within the kink space or world, this is becoming more known as a forceful submission fantasy, or, as mentioned, consensual non-consent. There isn't an open space for people to discuss these fantasies in particular and in a healthy way, without immediate backlash that because someone has thoughts like this, they clearly don't support the Me Too movement, even though the two things are completely different. Talking openly about our fantasies is really the key to helping people explore any thoughts constructively and safely. But unfortunately, most people are dealing with them in a state of isolation and have no idea that their sexual thoughts and desires are both common and valid. People get turned on by being totally in charge. And this is really just a sexual role-playing space within the dom-sub dynamic. There is no such thing as consensual rape. Any behaviour or exploration into the forced submission fantasy is fully consensual. The turn-on is the idea of it. And even when two people consent to a fantasy like this, it can still be a complicated state of play, and things will need to be discussed and addressed. They may range from mild to more extreme. And if this is a space yourself and your partner do end up wanting to explore, you may want to work through them. It may be a case of wanting to take your partner by surprise from within a dark room in your own house. But sometimes people want to be forced to take part in things they usually wouldn't. And these will be the boundaries to flesh out before anything ever begins. Because if they aren't put in place, then the consent isn't there. And then we're in a dangerous space. There is and probably always will be a huge amount of stigma around these kinds of fantasies and sexual desires, mostly because those who would not enjoy it or be aroused by it cannot find any level of understanding why someone would. And it is a sexual desire that people will commonly shame others for having. But all that really matters is how you and your partner or partners feel about it. It's not anyone else's business as much as people will give you their opinion. Everything will come down to consent and communication between you and your partner or partners. That's it. It is a complex fantasy, but the misconceptions about it need to leave. And people need to understand it involves consent and no one is actually taking part in any kind of rape. You will know your partner's sexual history and potentially your friends if you're looking to discuss this with them. So if anyone you're speaking with has experienced any non-consensual sex, you should probably expect some pushback from them because their own trauma will reflect not being able to understand why anyone would want to take part in an activity like this. I've experienced sexual assault in the past and would want a partner to be incredibly sensitive in approaching a fantasy like that, even though I would always be willing to communicate about it with them, and I wouldn't want them to hide it for the sake of my past. If you are deeply worried by these thoughts and really don't know how to communicate them, I would also always recommend speaking with a sex therapist, as they will be able to work through this with you. But you're not alone. It's just a fantasy that has to be handled with a certain level of sensitivity and care. How do I discover if I have a fetish or not? As discussed at the beginning of the episode, there is a difference between a kink and a fetish. And as a fetish is something that you absolutely require in order to get sexual pleasure, the likelihood, if you're already sexually active, will be that you're already aware of it. However, it can also happen that you not know something is your fetish until you try it, which is why it's always important to stay curious and try new things. Fetishes are generally sexual associations with something that isn't primarily associated with sex. Say, a foot fetish, for example. Although identifying some body parts as sexual and others as not is something we've been taught. So feel free to ignore those enforced sexual norms and pursue what feels good for you. Take some time to think about your senses and what feels good or enticing for you. For some people, that might be as simple as their partner wearing stiletto heels, or maybe wearing something like latex or rubber, which is actually one of the most common fetishes going. Fetishes are typically more common in men and penis owners, although in my opinion there has not been enough research into why that might be, so I'm choosing to take that with a pinch of salt, to be completely honest. We've lived in a world where women and vulva owners have felt sexually stifled since the beginning of time. So it may well be that less women and vulva owners have been open about their fetishes. You may well have some undiscovered kinks, but it's less likely that you have a full active fetish because it would be practically essential for it to be involved during arousal, sex, and orgasm. If you feel like you do have a fetish and you just aren't speaking about it yet, this is just me confirming that having a fetish is not weird, it's not wrong. As long as everyone is consenting, whatever you choose to indulge in, it's fine. Most people with fetishes feel like they are completely alone because people don't talk openly about it. But you are not on your own. And having a fetish is so much more common than people think. I get a lot of people writing to me who have foot fetishes and asking me for photos. And that isn't what I'm here to do. And I would actively advise those people to contact people who do provide that as a service. And more power to you for owning your fetish and being okay with it. And I want and hope you do find people who can provide that fulfillment for you. Some people try to then ignore their fetish or fetishes, almost like a way to kick the habit and hope that it will eventually go away. But that's unlikely. It will just linger and stay unresolved. Also, most people have no idea what they like sexually. So it's totally okay to know you have something you like a lot. Just remember that whilst all desires are different, they are all valid and don't feel ashamed of them. Just make sure you can have open and honest conversations with your partner or partners so that you can work through them with consent and healthy boundaries. If you are unsure if you have undiscovered kinks, then just continue exploring every feasible area of the sexual space. Try new things, new sensations, and see what feels good and works for you. Okay, last question of today. My boyfriend recently used restraints and a blindfold on me, and I basically had the best extended foreplay and sexual session of my life. It was amazing and I absolutely loved it. He now wants me to do that back to him, and I really want to, but I feel nervous because I feel like I'm not sure what to do to keep the foreplay going in the same way he was able to for me, other than giving him oral sex. Do you think it's best to use the blindfold on him, as men are so visual and I don't want that to affect his experience? Any tips you have would be amazing. For a start, I love that you and your partner are exploring and that you had an incredible sexual experience together. That's amazing and I'm honestly thrilled for you. And yes, to the blindfold. Whilst men and penis owners are visual creatures, not knowing what's coming next is incredibly sexy and exciting. I know we always think that women and vulva owners are all about the foreplay and men and penis owners just want to get it out of the way as quickly as possible and get to the penetrative side of things. But the truth is, extending the foreplay for your male penis owner partner can be extremely pleasurable for them and can only enhance your ongoing sexual time together, as it just gives you more to play with in general. I also know that the first time you essentially take charge can feel a little daunting, but you can absolutely own this and embrace your inner dominatrix. As previously mentioned, I can definitely lean into the more submissive side of things in bed. So if I'm on this side of things, sometimes it can help to literally create an alter ego for yourself and fully embrace it as almost a character. That might not feel necessary to you, but this can definitely create confidence for people if they do feel a little nervous about that side of things specifically. The main part of this whole experience is going to be sensual touch. And when you take away one sense during sex, all the others get heightened. So this is just the most fun time to experiment with all things touch. There are so many erogenous zones that get neglected during sexual play. This can include earlobes, the neck and throat area, even nipples if they are sensitive. So play around with all of those erogenous zones using your mouth and tongue and try to feel the areas that he reacts to most. If you wanted to include some accessories, you could try a tickler or feathers or even a whip if that's the direction you're wanting to go in. You can experiment with all of those different sensations. If he likes the slightly rougher side of things, you can also incorporate a little light nail scratching or biting into the mix. There's also temperature play. You can experiment with both hot and cold. The most common uses are ice and wax from a body-safe candle, as previously mentioned. Obviously, these can be quite intense and specific sensations, so make sure to discuss whether he's okay with temperature play before you start, as he will be blindfolded and unaware of what's coming. Or you can do a little consent check-in in the moment. You can also try some sensual massage. I know that our go-to is always oral sex, but do not neglect your hands. Grab some lube and take some time for a slow and sensual hand job and incorporate that into the sensual massage. You may find that he might need to take breaks, and that's okay. Sometimes when we're enjoying these sensations, we want them to last as long as possible. So it's essentially adding a little edging into the mix. And also, if you wanted to spice up the oral a little bit once you do get to that place, you could start by going down on him. But there's nothing to say you can't incorporate yourself into the mix. So you could always turn it into a 69 situation. People get super turned on by having their partner sit on their face whilst they're restrained. Even once you get to the point where you're ready for penetration, keep it slow, keep the tease going for as long as possible. You're both going to be super frustrated by now, but you can continue to ramp this up right until the very last second. Take some time to ease yourself onto him. Let him beg for it. Honestly, it's going to be amazing for both of you. When I've had sexual experiences like this with partners in the past, sometimes they've wanted to remove the blindfold at the very end or as they finish. And whether or not you want to comply with that is, of course, completely up to you. I personally think you're going to have a great time. And to anyone else who might be considering a night like this with their partner, sending you luck and all the sexy vibes. Okay, so one last thing I have to mention before we go is aftercare. It is extremely important. It's an extremely important part of any sexual practice, but no one seems to care about the aftermath. However, in BDSM practice, you should be looking to have a period of nurturing your partner after a sexual session, and that should be tailored to whatever that individual may need in the moment. Talking about the encounter you've just had can even increase your oxytocin levels, which is the love and bonding hormone. So try to take some time to debrief. In fact, I'd really like everyone listening to begin to make aftercare more of a priority. So maybe make that a point of discussion with your partner or partners this week. We will obviously continue to talk about kink, fetish and BDSM and all of these wonderful things in further episodes. But for now, you might need some aftercare from this podcast episode. So I'm sending you love, gin, tea, oxytocin, or whatever it is you might need. I look forward to seeing you back here next week. Thanks for coming. Thank you for tuning in to Sex on the Peach today, and I hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. You can find and follow me on Instagram, YouTube and TikTok at Sex on the Peach Cast, and you can also get in touch with me at sexonthepeachcast@gmail.com. Please do continue to like, share, subscribe, rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, and I'll see you next week. Love, peace.